Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special live edition of the Marketplace Masters, brought to you by Merchant Spring, the leading marketplace analytics platform for agencies and investors. Marketplace Masters is all about going deeper into the challenges e-commerce sellers face to broaden understanding and provide practical actions to implement. I'm your host, Paul Sonneveld, and today I am joined by Martin Huwel from Consulterse. In today's episode, we're discussing Amazon's annual vendor negotiation process and strategies you can adopt to ensure you're well prepared and maximize the outcomes for your business. Martin founded Consulterse to help B2C household and CPG brands reliably increase their 1P vendor profits with Amazon. Prior to Consulterse, he had an extensive career with Amazon in Europe. Thank you for being on the show, Martin.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
It's close to Easter, and I know it's a busy time, so great to have you on. Today we're talking about Amazon's annual vendor negotiations, and this is a topic that is not very well known, certainly within the broader marketplace community. So I'd love to really get into it and do a little bit of education and also try and make this as interactive as possible and answer a number of questions down the road as well. But let's just get to the basics. If you can just start us off, but what is the annual vendor negotiation? What are we thinking about, particularly for those that are actually not selling 1P on Amazon? What is it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's start maybe right off the bat with a little bit of a definition what 1P and 3P is. I think just to bring everyone on the same level and also up to speed. So Amazon offers, in a simplified manner, two main opportunities for brands to sell their products on or to Amazon. And the first option is the 3P model, where brands are actually the marketplace sellers. They compete for the buy box, and they're also following kind of a model where they hand over a commission to Amazon, and Amazon either takes all of the friction in terms of the delivery and logistics out for them, or they're deciding to only use Amazon to utilize as a platform to sell their products on, and also on the fulfillment themselves. Now, the other way that Amazon is working, particularly with larger brands, is offering their wholesale or first-party model, meaning that brands can sell directly to Amazon. They get purchasing orders, and the invoices are paid by Amazon themselves or itself, which means that Amazon not only owns the inventory, but also owns the pricing. And this point is obviously very interesting because it means that Amazon's in the ownership of handling their margin. And this is also the emerging fact why Amazon is on a repeated basis negotiating with first-party vendors the trading terms, cost prices, and all other aspects of a commercial trading relationship that they have. And into that integrates what you've already teasered, Paul, the annual vendor negotiation. It's basically what a lot of brands will be aware of is a joint business plan with a lot of other retailers. It's just coined in a different term with Amazon. And it basically just describes the negotiations that Amazon conducts with vendors to secure investments for their top line, but also their bottom line growth. And they are typically conducted on an annual basis.
And that sort of, you're starting to hear about the process. We'll get into the process a little bit more, but in terms of timing, does this happen for everyone at the same time? Is it, does Amazon sort of down tools on the vendor management side and say these next 2 months we're renegotiating all of our vendor relationships, or does it happen through the course of the year? What does the timing look like?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. There are some core timings that a lot of brands will be aware of if they have negotiated with Amazon before, particularly around the fourth quarter for consumer goods brands, and from the first quarter of each year Amazon is typically reaching out to brands in the hard lines and other categories that it owns. So it depends a little bit. Brands can also have a complete unique setting with their vendor manager at Amazon. So if they are, for example, having a very seasonal product portfolio, then it often makes sense to pull the negotiations out of the very dense and very busy quarters, such as the fourth quarter, and to rather commence negotiations in the first or second quarter of the year thereafter. So it depends a little bit on the individual setting, if there is any, but typically you will see them starting to commence around Q4, but latest in the first quarter of each year.
Okay. So let me probe you a bit deeper on the actual process then. I mean, we talk about it as a process. That implies that there are steps and preparations and all of that. So let's tackle the first one first. What does the process look like, right? If you're trying to draw a diagram, I mean, I'm not going to ask you to do this live, by the way, but paint a picture for us. What does the process look like, and how does it run?
Yeah, it's typically quite straightforward, right? I mean, you always have some kind of preparation phase where you'll really need to look into your KPIs, understand, okay, what do you want to get out of the negotiation, and are you happy with the trajectory of your business performance, but also the business development over the past 12 months. And then thereafter, you usually have then actually the commencement of the negotiation. You could, depending on the size of the business, enter a phase that is called escalation, where you might not find right away mutually agreeable solution. It typically then also requires more senior stakeholders to come on board to the negotiation before you then can progress to kind of the closing phase. And after you've closed the negotiation, so you basically agreed on the terms and conditions, you signed the agreements, then comes the execution and controlling phase, where you ensure that also after your negotiation, you are able to align with your vendor manager, so with your Amazon buyer, on everything that has been agreed, and you work towards the mutually set goals throughout the year. So you can really differentiate or categorize it into five phases: preparation, negotiation, escalation, closing, and then the execution and controlling phase.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can I just prompt you a little bit more? I'd love to know just a little bit more about the escalation phase. You're saying not everyone goes into that phase. That means there must be some conditions or some circumstances by which some vendors do enter that phase and others don't. Are you able to just put a bit of flavor around that? What would be some typical situations whereby, as a vendor, you may end up in that phase? Because in a way, to me, the word escalation may have a negative meaning. Certainly, from being having a retail background myself, that usually when things go wrong and it ends up being like more senior meetings. But you also mentioned the word acceleration, so I'd love to just dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, a negotiation is always the discussion of two viewpoints at the very end of the day, right? The brand on the one hand and Amazon on the other end. And there may be times where both sides are completely aligned on the priorities, the investments that are needed to be taken, and also the top line and bottom line performance of the account. And then it's all happy days. You can progress to the closing phase, and you can also start executing right away after closing your negotiation. But of course, as in a lot of trade term negotiations today, especially when we look at the current market environment, where you have skyrocketing costs and raw materials, shipping, and also other cost components that need to be managed, sometimes the alignment may not be as harmonized. And in such cases, a negotiation typically moves into this escalation phase, where the primary negotiating contacts are in a deadlock situation. And in order to get out of this deadlock, they either need to escalate it to their senior management, or if that is also unfruitful, they need to find other avenues to develop the business. It can take very different forms depending on the individual situation, but it doesn't have to be negative. It often also just means that you have to bring other stakeholders on board in order to onboard kind of a new perspective, a new angle to approach a certain topic where both sides cannot find a mutual agreement on.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I wanted to just ask you another question, which is, as you were talking, lots of my past experience came back, having been in physical retail for many years and being very involved in these sorts of processes. Typically, there are certainly kind of these two models, right? One of them is you negotiate everything into a net cost price, so all the terms, the rebates, the other support. The retailer just wants, give me the lowest net price, which some retailers and certainly some of the discount retailers in the offline world like to go for that. And then you have others which we tend to do more. There's a price, and then we also want to negotiate separately around how many rebates and how much advertising money you're going to spend with me as a retailer, and so it becomes almost like a menu that you align on. Where does Amazon sit on that equation, on that scale spectrum?
It's different compared to most of the discussions that you will have with a lot of the offline bricks and mortar retailers, simply because Amazon also goes after a net cost price at the end of the day, but they still see the setup quite differently. So of course they want the best cost price possible, but they also want to reserve certain investments in order to spend them on deal events such as Prime Day or Black Friday. They also want to accommodate for a budget that offsets any kind of margin challenges that they may incur throughout the year. Let's not forget, Amazon is a constant price follower. They are not setting their prices on the 1P vendor central model themselves. They're just orienting the price of any products that are being sold on competitive retailers and also their internal marketplace sellers. So they need to have this kind of cushion next to the cost price that they get offered in order to offset any kind of margin fluctuations that may incur over the year. The only difference and the only exception really where you see a similar approach and a similar setup as with offline retailers is when you negotiate with Amazon on, for example, a direct import model. So Amazon would actually purchase the goods in the port somewhere in China, for example, where you manufacture your products. They buy the products in a container load and they ship them to Europe or anywhere else in the world themselves and distribute them among their own fulfillment center network. In such cases, you will have a discussion on the net cost price with your vendor manager, simply because it is easier for them to set it up in the system, and it doesn't really make sense to add any kind of marketing funds on top of that.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Can I ask you a small clarifying question on that?
Sure.
When it comes to Amazon actually buying things FOB straight out of ports, does it mainly relate to their private label portfolio, or is that a model that is accessible to brands as well that sell via the vendor central platform?
It is accessible to brands as well, and Amazon uses it very heavily, especially in hardlines categories. So consumer electronics, home housewares, for example, simply because those products are typically quite bulky, quite heavy, and it makes sense to purchase them in bulk. So it's not exclusive to their private label products, for example, and they actively engage a lot of 1P vendors to take part in that, because the per unit economics at the end of the day make a lot of more sense to them, because they can bundle all of these products together on a ship or in an airplane and get it to the countries and the locals where they need them most.
Yeah, they'll be using their competitive advantage when it comes to supply chain to really drive down those unit economics.
They will go after cost efficiencies for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Well, let me change tack, because we know a little bit more about the process. You've given us a flavor of how Amazon thinks, but from a vendor point of view, knowing the process is not interesting enough. We actually want to be able to do better maybe than we did last year, and have a more fruitful relationship, but also, let's face it, we all want more favorable economics, right? Certainly when in the context of a negotiation where the power relationship is quite uneven and unbalanced. So let's talk about, as a vendor, how do you prepare for such a process? It feels very intimidating for me, right? To me, if I was a vendor, how do you prepare for it?
Well, typically you prepare for it the same way you prepare for any other trade negotiation, right? But in the case of Amazon, a lot of brands all of a sudden forget how to do that, and it's very interesting. So, if you think about it, the first thing you need to really obsess about is to know your KPIs. So ensure you know your top line performance, your bottom line performance, but also your operational performance of the past 12 months, and really understand how they benchmark against any other retail channel, and understand the root cause for their trajectory in the first place. If you have a declining average selling price on Amazon on certain on your top selling line items, you probably want to understand why that is, and you also want to understand why your margin may be going up or in decline. And this is often something that a lot of account managers are skipping as a step because it takes time. You need to crunch the numbers. You need to dive deep into the numbers as well. And it can be a little bit more frictionful and a little bit more miserable to actually get the data through or over Vendor Central. And that's okay. So I think it's key that you prepare for that and that you set up your dashboards with all of the KPIs you need to have well in advance before your negotiation even commences. So that's number one. I think the number two that brands should be very aware of is to become clear on the actual leverage that exists on both sides. So understand what Amazon really goes after. What does your buyer want from you? And you will get these hints throughout the year already because you have your discussions, you receive emails. And on the flip side, you know what you want and what is important to you and what is not important to you. And if you set this up as kind of a matrix with 4 quadrants or 4 fields, you can quickly map out what is of high interest to Amazon and what is also for high interest for yourself. And you can basically pinpoint these against each other and leverage in your negotiation exactly these fields because you can trade things that you want versus or against the things that Amazon wants. And thereby you also create kind of this power balance that you were talking about, Paul, that you may not see right away if you're not mapping that out before you actually start this negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think third and last is, prepare your commercials, right? Don't just focus on your cost prices and trading terms. But if you've done number one very well, so you have dived deep into your KPIs, you will also know, okay, how can you actually navigate and influence your bottom line and also your top line performance with Amazon? So do you need to go after certain top deal placements throughout the year in any key deal events, or is it really a bottom line discussion that you need to have at the very end of the day? And if that's the case, you need to look at your supply chain setup. Can you make it more efficient? Ask your vendor manager what they have to offer and at what price point. Or you need to take a look at also all of these below the fold investments, such as chargebacks, and negotiate around them. So start to leave these only like the sole focus of a cost price and trading terms discussion, which it's a typical trap because that's exactly what Amazon wants to talk about. But there's so much more in terms of investments and alignments that you can actually negotiate. So be aware of that and leverage it.
Yeah, it's certainly negotiation is absolutely key to, or preparation, I should say, is key to any negotiation. The more you prepare, the better the outcome. And a lot of that preparation is about finding new ways of getting more leverage and trying to shift that balance of power.
Yeah.
In your experience, what have you seen in terms of some of the most successful strategies for creating better leverage in this conversation? I'd love to the extent that you can, share maybe some great examples of innovative approaches or very common approaches that are taken in this area.
It depends always on the individual business situation, right? So I can't really give a good example that will be applicable to everyone. But generally speaking, what works best is to be really proactive and to not let the Amazon vendor manager steer the discussion. So if you've done the preparation and if you've mapped out the commercial leverage on both sides, nothing holds you back from waiting until your vendor manager is opening the discussion and sends you their first trade term proposal. Instead, be proactive, decide and communicate very clearly your negotiation principles and negotiation tenets under which you're able and under which you're willing to commence the discussions in the first place. And that's something that I do not see enough brands doing. They always wait for Amazon to do the first step. And it is quite a misconception that you have to do that. Because if Amazon sends you their first proposal and you're just accepting it, then you're actually in the situation where you have to respond on their terms. You need to respond to their timelines that were communicated, and you're not you're not having the ownership of the discussion at all. Instead, flip it around, come up with a very clear proposal, come up with very clear timelines, and approach Amazon very proactively with that. And you will be surprised how irritated a lot of vendor managers will be and how often this unfolds quite successfully for the overall negotiation thereafter.
Sounds like trying to get into the driver's seat before
100%.
Amazon starts driving, right? You're trying to get the keys to the car, start driving, and open the passenger door for them, and let them come along. There's always a
in the end, you
prize
know your
for
business
benefits
best,
taken.
right? As a vendor,
Yeah.
that's what it comes down to. And a vendor manager, they negotiate a lot of accounts at the same time. They will not know your business as well on Amazon as you do. You're looking into the data dashboards almost on a daily or at least on a weekly basis. So make use of that and use this knowledge to your advantage. That's really the biggest lever that brands can pull.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about this, the vendor manager, right? Obviously, we are dealing with an individual on the other side of the table. How are they looking at this process? What are their expectations? And what are some of the tactics that they may use to try and, regain leverage or, put more pressure on you to maybe accept a deal that you're not as amenable to accepting? We're dealing with an individual first. So what's going through their mind as they're talking to you as part of your annual process?
Yeah, I think a vendor manager, and the name of the job position is a little bit misleading. A vendor manager doesn't necessarily manage his vendors, but vendor managers manage the respective P&L of the category in which these brands and vendors sit. So the target of a vendor manager is to grow top line and bottom line of the category. And they will actually distribute these targets along the brands that are sitting in this category. And if some brands are underperforming in terms of top line performance, then they will try to address that first. In terms of tactics, there are various tactics available. I think the biggest that a lot of brands that haven't negotiated with Amazon much yet will be surprised about is how high they anchor. So meaning if you're starting your negotiation with Amazon, it's not unlikely to be faced, especially this year, with trade term increase requests of 8 to 15%, which is completely outrageous for a lot of brand owners and business leaders if you were to talk about any other kind of retailer. But just know that you do not have to reach these demands. And it is an anchoring tactic in order to anchor your mind very high and actually to get you closer to the ZOPA, which is the zone of a possible agreement. And a lot of juvenile negotiators will fall victim of that. So it's very important that you're becoming very aware that this anchoring tactic also works the other way. And whenever Amazon is anchoring very high, your anchor should be set actually very low so that you kind of, again, create this kind of balance of power and you ensure that you are actually talking about a mutual zone of possible agreement and not only about your zone of possible agreement that may not be even something that Amazon has to reach, right? If they ask for 8 to 15%, they may even just need 2 or 3% incrementally from yourself and your account. So just be sure that you're setting the anchor very low and you're also adding all of these kind of hidden negotiation levers that we've talked about earlier. So chargeback waivers or also the supply chain initiatives, because this is where for both sides actually the cost savings sit and where you can also drive a mutual sustainable business going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. When I was negotiating, we always had this concept of the ask, right? The retailer had this ask, and it was structured around maybe a theme or a program, and we had a way to get it. What always struck me is that on the vendor side, they were always in this response mode. Very rarely were there additional asks tabled by the actual vendor, right? And I think there's always the risk because Amazon is driving the process. We're just getting into this respond mode. We need to respond. We need to say, can we do this? Can we meet that? Can we do 8% or not? But actually, it's an opportunity to get some of your things on the table as well. Some of the things that you're interested in as a vendor, some of the things that you want to ask Amazon as part of a commercial structure and arrangement. What interesting things have you seen vendors ask Amazon? What are some of the things that, particularly the audience that's tuning in today, they may not even thought about that because they're in that responsive mode. What are some of the other things that you have seen vendors ask for and actually have Amazon agreed to even?
Yeah. So especially in my time as a vendor manager, it's not uncommon, but it's also not common at the same time to task your vendor manager more as a brand to work with you together in order to understand what are the needs of the actual business. Your vendor manager sits on a lot of data, but they will rarely take a look at it simply because they don't have the time and they don't make it a priority. It can make sense to actually put the demand on the table to say, okay, hey, we need to have at least quarterly strategy sessions, which may be normal with your other retail partners, but may not be normal with Amazon, to actually introduce a kind of more mutually accretive partnership where both sides understand what are actually the biggest levers in order to drive top line, to drive bottom line, and where are also the defects along the operational side of the business. And this can be in the supply chain. This can also be in other kind of operational aspects that you may not have even thought about. And you need this kind of relationship with your vendor manager because they are the ones who know firsthand what new programs are being launched that can actually save you a lot of money. And by not asking for a regular exchange throughout the year, you're kind of missing this opportunity. And of course, your vendor manager will not jump and say, okay, great, we are doing it. But at the very end of the day, if you be persistent and you keep pushing for it, your vendor manager will at least agree to quarterly review sessions where you can also make strategic topics key part of the discussion, which will help you alongside down the road when you commence your negotiations to know, okay, what are the kind of priorities that Amazon goes after in your specific category? Because it may be very different if you're in the healthcare consumer space or if you're going to the consumer electronics space. The priorities of Amazon will be vastly different. And if you do not have the regular exchange throughout the year without the constant pressure of terms negotiations, you will not necessarily be able to get all of the information you need and maybe you also want out of your Amazon buyer that can also help you to structure your partnership in a more successful way.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock and we are almost out of time. But before we do, I wanted to ask one question from me and one question from the audience. The question that I always ask is if, getting to really the practical here and now, if I am a vendor and I'm about to, enter my first annual vendor negotiation process, very intimidating the like, and you've outlined the process and the preparation and all that. That's great. Let's say the process is starting very, very shortly. What are some practical things? Easter's coming up, so after Easter next week, what are the two or three things you'd say? Start here, focus in terms of the preparation process. This is the right place to start for you. What practical tips would you give such a vendor?
Sure. Understand first and foremost what your current term setup is and what is the return on invest. So do you actually get something in return for the investments that you've taken or put aside in a promo fund? During a Prime Day, during a Black Friday, review the performance and also review the return on invest from every US dollar, euro, British pound, wherever you are spent against that. And the same thing you're doing with your investments into Amazon advertising. And you will quickly see that some parts of the P&L work very well and others don't. And the ones that do not work as well, you should look to either shift or to disinvest more or less. Now, disinvesting is obviously a word that will shrill the alarm bells in your vendor manager's head. So you need to have a very good storyline on, if you're disinvesting, how you're actually softening or removing the margin impact with Amazon and on your vendor account. And for that, you need to become very aware that you need to differentiate your portfolio across channels. It may not make sense to list every single product in your portfolio with Amazon if you struggle from a margin perspective. So you also should take a look at which kind of products perform very well and which kind of products are making you struggle when it comes to your bottom line performance, and which are also the ones that your vendor manager is constantly calling out. And try to find a path to green on those, because if you have both of these parts, you can very well create a storyline with the proposed investment structure that will help you to outline how you're going to manage the account in the next 12 months, how you're managing the investments that you're taking, and that you can also be confident that you know where you get the best bang for your buck. And you also highlight and give some peace and rest to your vendor manager, because you highlight to them, look, we understand your business model, we know what you need, we are happy to support you along the way, but those are also the changes that we need to make happen over the next 12 months in order to get there. Just know, not every change needs to be sudden. You can phase them over the months as well. So definitely, take a data-driven approach, and you will need to amend it to your unique business situation. Larger brands will have larger dashboards typically, so they can make use of that. And if you struggle with the data inputs, then I think that should be your first priority to get sorted, which will help you to then also navigate the discussions with your vendor manager much more effectively.
I see. Last question, which is slightly off topic here, but I think very relevant and very topical. In fact, I saw you actually talk about this in a discussion yesterday. And that's around the fact that certainly on the seller side or the 3P side, clearly Amazon is now raising the costs involved in FBA quite significantly. So my question, perhaps somewhat controversially, in the context of where there's a lot of conversation, we've even done a webinar around that, transitioning from 1P to 3P. As costs rise, is 1P becoming a more attractive channel particularly for manufacturers and brand owners? And
yes
there's a
and
lot
no.
in that question, and it's a little bit of a leading question. So I apologize up front, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. But the nature of the question is a little bit tricky, because profitable for how long, right? I mean, we saw a huge shift of agencies, consultants, and brands alike over the past few years, taking the stance that everyone should move from 1P to 3P because it's more profitable. Now, all of a sudden, Amazon raises their fees and everyone goes back to the first party model. The answer to your question is, you need to understand what works best from a capability standpoint and commercial standpoint for your brand. And everything else is manageable by differentiating your portfolio, by launching products that are specific to the Amazon channel. And it doesn't really matter at the end whether it is then 1P or 3P. The complexity that a lot of brands have, and if you're a third-party seller right now, you should be aware of, is that Amazon will be unmerciful with their price-following strategy on the first-party vendor central model. So they will follow and match anyone that is selling your products on their marketplace or with major retailer that they see as key competitors compared to customers or for customers in your category. Of course, you need to understand what are your commercials, but again, it comes more back to the discussion on why do you think 1 or 2 basis points or percentage points will help you to justify all of the headaches, also from a capability and operational standpoint, to make the move from 3P to 1P. The other way around, from 1P to 3P, there are a couple of other commercial implications involved that we won't have time to tap into. But become clear on the reasons you want to go to 1P or 3P, and then stick to it over the next 5 to 10 years, unless something really fundamentally changes. And this shouldn't be only a fee increase.
Thank you, Martin. Well, we're out of time, so let's wrap it up there. Martin, really thank you for coming on the show today. We certainly appreciate the expertise that you brought to the table. Amazon vendor negotiations can be such a daunting exercise, and thank you for helping us to demystify this topic and for being so generous in providing lots of practical tips along the way. Just in case viewers are wondering, what is the best way to get in touch with you if they maybe need more support or they have some follow-up questions?
Sure. I mean, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I think there's always the discussion happening, or you can go to my website. There are a couple of practical articles and blog articles available. It's consulters.com. I'm sure it will be linked somewhere. So yeah, feel free to go there and get in touch if you have any other questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, everyone, that is it for this episode of Marketplace Masters. Don't forget to join us next time for another special Amazon Vendor Edition. Thank you very much for listening.